one of the basic reasons is I discovered how many women feel so ashamed of being ill. So many women seem to attribute their illness, whatever it is, to stress. And they see their stress as a sort of a public manifestation of their inability to manage their lives. They're embarrassed, so they hesitate to get a second opinion. They don't want anybody basically to know that they're ill. I mean, that's one reason. The other reason is, we're taught to play nice and to make friends. We don't want to hurt the doctor's feelings. We don't want to be rude. So we don't do it. And it's a major, major mistake.
Welcome to Care More, Be Better, a podcast for people like you who care about the social impact of conscious companies and everyday heroes. Hear inspiring stories from those who put people and planet before profit and personal gain. You'll learn how you can make a difference, vote with your dollars, and get involved today. Here's your host, Karina Belizzi.
Hello, fellow do-gooders and friends. I'm your host, Karina Belizzi, a climate activist and social activist who is passionate about storytelling. My goal with this podcast is to invite you to care a little more so we can all build a better world together, build a better society, and even regenerate Earth. Today, we're going to explore how women, typically the medical gatekeepers for their families, inadvertently undermine their own care. They hesitate to call the doctor when they don't feel well, and they worry that their doctor visit will take time away from their families or work. They may hesitate to ask doctors the necessary questions and often don't make the most compliant of patients. To unpack this issue, I'm joined by Susan Salenger. She is the author and researcher behind Sidelined, How Women Manage and Mismanage Their Health. It will be released in April 2022, and I have my pre-press copy here that I've just had the pleasure of spending about a week with. So, Susan, without further ado, welcome to the show.
Thank you for that lovely introduction. I appreciate it.
Well, I have to say, I do understand this journey a little bit from a personal level because I am a woman. I do have 2 boys and a husband, and I do tend to manage their health care. I'm the one that takes them to their doctor's appointments. I'm the one who reminds my husband when it's time for him to get a physical. And so I felt this book. I also understand that your personal story, when you didn't ask for a second opinion, even when your gut told you that you should, I mean, that really resonated with me. I'd love for you to just start by telling us that story. Why did you choose to go under the knife even when you believed you did not need to?
Well, just a quick backstory, which is I had been on some medication and then I tried some new medication and had some common side from it. And the doctor said, oh my goodness, we better do some tests and see what's going on. And so we did the tests and they were normal. And then he said, well, you need exploratory surgery. And I was sure it was the new medication. It was just too much of a coincidence not to be. But I got frightened. And before I knew it, there I was lying on a gurney, hooked up to tubes and orderlies pushing me into this very cold surgery room. And, I had the surgery. Everything was fine. I went back to the old medication and that was that. The symptoms stopped. But I am and was so ashamed of myself. I could have gotten a second opinion. You're absolutely right. Whatever it was, I had more than enough time to think it through, gain some perspective. I wasn't going to die in the next 24 hours, but I really just didn't listen to myself. And that was the impetus for writing the book.
So when you get into the second chapter of your book, you aptly titled that chapter, Nice Girls Finish Last. So, in my intro, I shared a little bit about that perspective, right? That you're afraid of putting your doctor out almost. Like, why are you in that position in the first place? Like, what is it that's making us choose to put our health before even the opinion of the doctor? Like we're sacrificing our health in a way for the opinion of somebody who we see once a year in some cases.
Right. No, I think that there's a couple of reasons. The first, one of the basic reasons is I discovered how many women feel so ashamed of being ill. So many women seem to attribute their illness, whatever it is, to stress. and they see their stress as a sort of a public manifestation of their inability to manage their lives. They're embarrassed, so they hesitate to get a second opinion. They don't want anybody basically to know that they're ill. I mean, that's one reason. The other reason is, we're taught to play nice and to make friends. We don't want to hurt the doctor's feelings. We don't want to be rude. So we don't do it. And it's a major, major mistake. I think what a lot of us don't realize, I certainly didn't until I did the research, is how tricky an accurate diagnosis can be. And that has nothing to do with the competence of the doctor. It's just that there's maybe 20 to 30,000 different diseases out there, many of whose symptoms mimic one another. So for the doctor, it's like looking at for a needle in a haystack.
Well, they have to respond. They have to figure out what it is that is the actual symptom that they should be treating,
Right.
which are potentially just kind of noise to the main issue.
Yes.
And I think as we continue to live our lives, especially when we're eating a bunch of processed foods and junk
Yes.
food
Yes.
that isn't health supportive, I mean,
Right.
that's one of the things I think that women might be ashamed of when they're going to the doctor's office. Like they don't want to tell them, oh, well, I ate half my kid's sandwich and it was just peanut butter and jelly, or
Right.
I had that bag of chips as opposed to making something wholesome, or yeah, I drank a little bit too much wine consistently and now I'm starting to see weight gain from that or whatever. And that's impacting my health in these ways. But I don't want to tell my doctor because this is something I covet in a way, like having mommy time or
Right.
socializing with friends, or after the kids are in bed, maybe
Right.
having an unhealthy habit. And we don't necessarily want to share that in, I think, this really transparent way because it's just hard to admit that your life isn't perfect, I think.
Yeah. You think? Yeah, for sure. I think, though, another reason is about second opinions that we have to get there. We may not have the resources, either financial or transportation. We may not have childcare. So it's not just a question of picking up the phone, making an appointment, and going over. It kind of depends who you are, where you are, and what your circumstances are.
Well, I'll give you a clear example from my own life. I made appointments for all my own kids. And then my appointment for an OBGYN, every 3 years, I'm supposed to get screened for, what is it? They do a PAP now every 3 years.
Yeah.
And I completely missed the appointment. I got a notice in the mail. Like that's how far it had been, like a week or so. And I got a notice in the mail, like, you missed this important screening. You should really go in and do this.
Oh.
And the fact that I had to be prodded in that way, I mean, I felt like I was getting a past due notice from like some bill I didn't pay.
Well, and I wish I could say you were atypical, but I don't think you are, unfortunately.
No, I've typically been religious about getting my annual, but
Yeah.
because of the fact that they shifted to this every 3 years, it's almost like when it comes to that particular PAP screening or whatever, I just look at it as, oh, well, I guess if it can wait 3 years, like what's it this time? It just kind of gets that feeling that it doesn't feel quite as essential.
I just think it's so important to take care of ourselves. In fact, at the back of my book, there's a resource list, and it gives you all of the tests that you should try to have if you possibly can. And I think that insurance covers most of them. But
Right.
just to go back to second opinions, just for a second, there was a really interesting study done of about under 300 patients, all of whom had a diagnosis, whatever it was. And they all went I think it was to the Mayo Clinic, actually, but I'm not sure. They all went for a second opinion, and 86% had either a completely different diagnosis or a refined diagnosis with more nuances. So, I mean, 86%, that is a hell of a lot.
So help me understand this. 86% aren't getting their second opinion?
No, 86%. No, that I can't say, although a lot of us don't. But what the study revealed was that of those patients that did, of the 300 patients or whatever it was that did, 86% of them had a different diagnosis than when they went in.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, that's
I don't know why
amazing.
I was hearing that differently, but
I probably
clarification I
was.
think is important in these sorts of cases too, because like when we
Right.
get to talking about statistics, I think some people's eyes just glaze over.
I know.
Like, oh no, somebody mentioned a number. What does this mean now? Do I have to
It's
take
true.
notes? Am I going to
Right,
be tested
right.
on this later?
Yeah.
So let's talk a moment just about that perspective of having to go through the process of getting a second opinion. Now, I think sometimes people don't do this because they think, oh, my doctor's the authority. They must know what's best for me.
Right.
I'm following their guidance, and that's essentially what happened in your case, right? So
Yes,
so what
absolutely.
lens would you ask this person to adopt to help them be an advocate for their own health and
That's a
really
good
seek that
question.
second opinion?
I like that question. I think you have to look through the lens of this. Your diagnosis and your treatment is truly a collaboration between you and your doctor. And your doctor needs some backup. I mean, I always think that four eyes or ears are better than two. And you have to remember, again, he's looking for a needle in a haystack. And particularly if your symptoms are vague ones, like fatigue, loss of appetite, losing weight, gaining weight. I mean, those symptoms fit so many diseases, it's truly almost impossible. And in some ways, it's not even fair to expect the doctor to get it right on his first go round. If you go in with pain in your leg and your leg is broken, it's obvious. But for
Mhm.
most of us, it's not that simple. So I think the lens that women should choose, and for that matter, men, it's a collaboration. And I think that maybe will change women's attitudes. I hope.
Yeah, and I agree. A couple of the things that you mention in your book have to do with certain diagnoses, like if somebody has fibromyalgia, as a for example,
Mhm.
often misdiagnosed people are taught to I won't say they're taught to think it, but often think, oh, it must be in my head.
Right.
Often the doctor might even make them feel that way, that, oh,
Yes.
well, perhaps this issue is psychological and you need to seek some other support. So, how would you ask or advise somebody to navigate that sort of situation when they have some sort of diagnosis that's a little bit more difficult to pin down?
That's also a good question, and that is really tricky because it can take almost 5 years, sometimes 7 years, for people with chronic diseases, whether it's fibromyalgia or whatever, to get a diagnosis. And there's been several books about how different women have traveled from doctor to doctor to doctor. And I think that all I can say is you have to stand your ground. If you don't think it's psychological, of course you're under stress because you're in pain,
Hmm.
but if you know that just the pain that's causing you stress, you have to just absolutely get a second opinion, a third opinion, and keep going until you finally find the most accurate diagnosis.
Now, I think a big part of the thing that might be holding people back has to do with finances. And in some cases, you're paying a copay
Right.
depending on your insurance, that copay might be quite large, or you might have a minimum expense that you have to reach in order to get to that space. So, what kind of recourse do individuals have if they're struggling in that way?
Yeah, you know what? I don't know. I think
Hmm.
that it depends on your insurance. And I also think that it depends on, some people don't have the transportation or the time to
Hmm.
go to all those appointments that I just described. And I can understand that. But if you're not satisfied with your original diagnosis, if it doesn't feel right, if it doesn't feel comfortable, don't do what I did. I mean, listen to your gut. Do as I say, not as I do.
Well, I appreciate the I don't know, because there are a lot of questions I have that I don't know the answer to either. And I continue to seek. I will give you another, for instance, in my case, I had a couple of spots appear on my temples, and they
Right,
could just be age spots, or call them what you will,
right.
keratosis of some sort. I'm forgetting what the actual technical term is,
Yeah,
but I
sure.
saw them erupt on my face in July after I'd gone through a slight medication change.
Uh-huh.
And so I thought it could have been related to that, because often what miasma or just discoloration of the skin can be a result of a
Right,
number of different things. Can be
right.
hormonal. I'm pre-menopausal, somewhere in there because of my
Yeah,
age. Like, I'm just middle of that zone where
yeah,
it could be so many different things.
yeah,
And so what did I do? I immediately just made an appointment. I went to the doctor. Now, the way they were running things, because we're in the midst of COVID, is a little strange. Like, I just basically saw some techs that were all gloved up and everything, and, with a mask and shield and
yeah.
everything. And they took high tech photos using an iPhone of all things
Oh my
of
goodness.
my face, like with some attachment on it to magnify, and on the two spots, sent it over to dermatology. And then I had a diagnosis of non-specific keratosis or something like that. So they gave me a cream that I would have to apply to my face for a couple of weeks, and then just essentially say, okay, then after that, if they don't disappear, then we'll check in with you again, basically. Nobody called me back. I had to sit there and kind of hound, like, "Hey, I'm done with the diagnosis." And it wasn't until I took my 4-year-old in for a doctor's appointment and just mentioned to my doctor in person, "Hey, nobody's getting back to me. This is what happened. I did finish the cream, but the spots aren't gone. So probably need to follow up there. But it's just like, I think the way our systems are, sometimes a person in that situation falls through the cracks too if they're not
Yes.
taking it really seriously and making the time to get back out there. And in my case, what I'm busy. I've got my 2 kids. I work. I podcast.
Right.
There's a lot of balls that I'm juggling, and so I'm exactly the person that you wrote this book for. And so, I mean, I just feel like there is a dramatic social impact to not putting our health first. If we
Mhm.
think about every time you fly on a plane, what do they say? You have to put your mask on first
Right.
before you
Right.
assist the person next to you.
Right.
And I think I'm just full transparency, haven't been putting my physical health first.
Right.
Need to start making some changes to do that again. And this is
Yeah.
something I come back to probably numerous times over my life. Like, oh,
Yeah.
okay, well, maybe need to eat less of these carbohydrates, refined foods, and get more to the whole foods again,
Yeah.
and adjust so that my health is at its best, so that my energy level is at its best. And so that if I do have a precancerous lesion, I'm going to heal pretty quick after I get that treatment, as opposed to just being in a spot where I'm going to struggle through the treatment and then struggle through recovery and. Like, I need to set myself up for health, and I need to take that as a responsibility on my own.
I think that's really important what you're saying, and I actually heard you saying two things. The first is that there are some definite structural issues in our
Yes,
medical system that are make it a lot more difficult for women than it is for men, although we're all up against it. I mean, there's particularly during COVID, there's no question. But I also think that we have to remember that self-care really equals healthcare. Because if you don't take care of yourself, you do let your health go, and then you can't take care of your family in the way that you want to. And I think that that's an important thing to remember. And I
right.
also well, yeah, and I also think that again, if you blame yourself, if you become your own victim, it makes it much more difficult to recover.
That's right. If I don't get these checked by dermatology, which I'm going to do now, but if
Yes,
I
yes,
don't have that occur, then what? I could leave my kids without a parent if I don't take this
right,
seriously. Like,
right.
that's the worst case scenario. And so, not to be like a Cassandra about it, right?
No,
But
but you're of course.
seriously,
No, it's
important.
funny, I'm smiling because I have a spot on my face that hasn't gone away, and I keep watching it and nothing change it doesn't grow, it doesn't shrink, it does nothing, so I too am going to the dermatologist. But I think one of the things that I really object to in a diagnosis is when they say, "Well, let's watch and wait." Sometimes, of course, that's you wanna be conservative, you wanna be more cautious than not. But I don't really wanna watch and wait to see if what happened. I know this isn't right, so I just as soon have it removed unless they think I'm wrong. I don't wanna tell the doctor what treatment I need. But on the other hand, I don't necessarily want it to develop into something that's a full-blown serious disease. And my husband had melanoma for a while, just at one couple of different points, and I don't want that to happen. It's scary.
Right. Well, in my case, I now know that that topical cream that they asked me to put on for a couple of weeks was a mild chemotherapeutic agent.
Yes,
So
I know.
it made me feel completely crummy for the period of, putting it on for a couple weeks and also the month that followed.
Yeah,
And so and nothing changed. So
right,
either not what you were thinking it was and therefore not treatable in that way, or insufficient treatment. And I didn't really know another way. I'm just thinking, okay, well, I'm just going to follow my doctor's recommendations because I don't want to take a chance with this.
right.
And so now at least I'm going to get in front of an actual dermatologist as opposed to a tech just taking a photo of my,
Right,
with an
right.
iPhone, which I'm sorry, but that seems like a little low tech to me.
Yeah, it does to me too, just a tad, just a tad.
Yeah.
And it can be a dangerous problem, I mean, my husband just thought his foot was dirty, he kept scrubbing it, and he had this spot on it. And I would not have we didn't see a tech, we did see a dermatologist, and I would have been uncomfortable if we hadn't. So I know
Yeah.
just what you're saying.
Yeah. Well, I lost my grandmother, my dear Nida May, my Nida May. I have the same middle name as she. I lost her to melanoma when I was 9 years old.
Oh,
And so, it's like one of those things that, again, I take pretty seriously. But
yes, of course, absolutely.
now I think that another issue that we're kind of touching on a little bit has to do with women's healthcare versus men's healthcare. And the things that come up for me, particularly because I have a background in nutrition and I've done a lot in the space of heart health,
Hmm.
is how heart disease is the number one killer of both men and women.
Hmm.
But we really only talk about it with regard to men.
Right.
And so women don't necessarily know how to identify the signs of a heart attack or even the things that are leading up to a heart attack.
Right.
If they're not getting screened regularly, if they're not taking their doctor's perspective on those things, if they're not getting blood work done, they don't necessarily know that there's a problem or really what it would take to identify that
Hmm.
particular health issue until it's too late.
Yes.
So I wonder what your thoughts are specific to that. And then I'd like to talk about how we medicate men versus women.
Aha, I would do. My thoughts on the heart attack, I'll tell you a study because it actually frightened me. There was a study done with a bunch of internists, and there was a fictitious male patient and a fictitious female patient. And both patients were given patients, they were fictitious, that the doctors were given a script. And both patients had exactly the same cardiac symptoms and exactly the same cardiac risks. And when the first script had absolutely no mention of stress whatsoever, both the man patient and the woman patient received equal treatments. They were all told to go for a cardiac workup. As soon as the female patient, her script said that she was under stress. And when that script was evaluated, only 15% of the women were told to go for a cardiac workup. So I think that the minute doctors see stress or women patients say they're under stress, it can skew the diagnosis. And I think that that's a very dangerous precedent. I have two daughters, both of whom are older, and I've told them just from my research that if you think you're having a heart attack and they tell you that it's stress, or if you're told it's stress, or if you're told it's a stomach ache, insist on an EKG. You must get an electrocardiogram before you leave the hospital, if you go to emergency. And I think that that's very important. I think even in 2022, as sophisticated medically as most of us are, that heart attack symptoms are still misinterpreted in women. And I don't know quite why that is, frankly, because they're just as common in women as it's not an unusual occurrence.
Well, and the social impact of that, let's get back to that, is
Mhm.
that often women experience heart attacks to the point where they may have been having miniature heart attacks for days on end.
Right.
By the time that they get to the doctor, they need something like a triple or quadruple
Right.
bypass because they've so damaged their heart and they didn't
Yeah.
even really know what was happening. So this happened specifically in my circle. I had a nanny and she had texted me in the middle of my workday. I work from home. I was nursing, so she would text me like, "Hey, someone's, time to feed baby," type thing now and then. And a text came through. That's what I expected. I picked it up and she said, "I'm really not feeling well. Come upstairs as soon as you can." I
Oh,
was in the middle of a meeting. So I just said, "Okay, I'm sorry. This never happens. I need to go."
right.
Got off the call, went upstairs, and she said, "Well, I'm nauseous and I've had a headache off and on for a few days now."
Wow.
And I just said, "Okay, but you never call in sick." And we can talk about that too, the fact that women
Yes.
often work when they are not feeling good.
Right.
But she never called in sick. She was always there, very reliable, like everything you would want in somebody that's going to be taking care of your
Yeah.
children and,
Yeah.
there to support you every day, but to her own detriment in this case. And I
Mm,
just looked at her and I said, "We're going to the hospital right now. We're getting in the
agree.
car." "Oh, but I don't want to bring no. What are we going to do with the baby? I don't want to bring them to the hospital. That's where all these sick people are." Again, putting him first, putting
Right.
my child first.
Right.
And I
Right.
said, "We are getting in the car right now." So I get her in the car thinking, okay, call her husband. He's going to meet us there. Like this is the whole real story, right? I didn't want to put her, call 911, wait for a van to come show up and pick her up and take her to the hospital.
Right.
I was identifying already the signs of heart attack and the fact
Right.
that she said that she'd been experiencing these symptoms off and on for a few days. Like I
Yeah.
was just like, we're getting to the hospital now.
Right.
She ended up, having to vomit in the bucket that I brought in the car with us
Oh,
because she was so sick. We get to the ER and I'm just like, somebody needs to see her right now. I'm fairly certain she's having a heart attack. Here's her symptoms. She says that she's been experiencing these symptoms for a couple of days now. Get her in. And they just looked at her and they're like, okay, we're getting her in. Got her on an EKG. Turned out that she had been having heart attack over the course of probably as much as a week,
Wow.
and had to end up getting a triple, quadruple bypass, something
Oh,
like that. I can't remember exactly, but it meant that she had to retire from being my nanny.
oh.
But, we were able to ensure that she could go on and living a relatively healthy life
Well,
for the
you
next few
saved her
years.
life. You saved her.
Yeah. Well, it's possible. I mean, she might have been okay, but if she'd waited much longer,
Mm-mm.
probably not.
Well,
And
I had an experience which I didn't realize. I had the stomach flu. I always get the stomach flu. I don't know why I'm vulnerable to it. And one night, in fact, just in the last year, I started to perspire and I felt clammy. And I did just what I'm not supposed to do. I thought, well, I'm going to watch and wait. Either I'll get better in 24 hours or I won't. And then I was researching the chapter on hearts and second opinions and
oh
all. And
no.
apparently you only have about 4 hours before you do real damage to your heart muscle. I mean, I could have died. I could have killed myself
Yeah.
trying. I didn't want to wake my husband. I didn't want to upset my daughters and have everybody rush to the hospital. So I did, like I always say, do as I say, not what I do. I was taking care of them instead of myself.
Well,
Um,
and it's not like this is exclusive to women either. I
right.
mean, my own husband, when I was pregnant with our first child, thought he had food poisoning. His stomach was really hurting for like a couple of days. And I was like, this isn't going away. You need to go be seen. And so as I was going to my OB appointment, he went just across the parking lot to another building. And it turned out he had an acute appendicitis. It was probably, hours from bursting if he hadn't gone in. And so had to be seen right away, got the surgery, everything was okay. And so I think we need to learn to identify and listen to ourselves. Like if you
Yes.
have food poisoning, it shouldn't last more
No,
than
no.
10 hours.
Right.
And if the
Right.
pain continues, there's something else going on. You might need to see a doctor.
And that's true if as your nanny was, if you're nauseous for a week or have headaches for a week, it shouldn't continue like that.
Right.
I mean, if a couple of Tylenol or aspirin doesn't cure it, do something.
Right. So if we
I
think about it, and women, like you often don't have the same symptoms as men. It's not your arm going numb and pain in your
Right,
chest.
right,
It's
right.
nausea and headaches, and that's what it can look like.
It's also incidentally depression. If you find yourself particularly depressed and you don't have a reason for it, that can be a symptom of a heart issue as well. I didn't realize that again until I did my research.
Wow.
I thought that was interesting.
I'm watching you on the screen share, and we see tomes of journals behind you, blue and red and white. It's very patriotic. So,
Right, right, of course, that wasn't my goal, but yes.
no, but I'm curious to see like what was your journey to writing this book, because it does have some very practical guidance in it for
Yes,
women throughout their courses of lives, the sorts of issues that they tend to encounter more from a health perspective,
right.
and some basic common sense kind of guidance about how they might approach their healthcare. So, how did this journey happen?
Well, after I had my own surgery, I thought to myself, I can't be the only idiot in the room. There must have been other women that have made medical decisions that they too later regretted. So I found some women, I interviewed a bunch of them, and all of them at one time or another had done just, more or less what I did, not necessarily surgery, but they'd gone along with their doctor, even though it went against their better judgment. And so then I thought, well, I better do some research and see, is this typical or is it just the particular women I interviewed? That can happen. So I went and did a lot of research, subscribed to a lot of journals, as you can see. And there's a ton of literature that says, women don't take care of themselves. We put our families first. We put ourselves last. I mean, it's very interesting. And shame is really one of the primary reasons, besides taking care of our families, that we do that. We're embarrassed. We think we can't manage our lives, and illness is random. And I think we all forget that. But so the journals here back up what I extrapolated from and learned from all the women that I interviewed.
So you just said illness is random.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to talk for a moment about the fact that there's this common perception, like there's karma out there, even from a health perspective, that I don't know, you might have done something to deserve the health cards that you were dealt.
Right.
So I'd like to just hear from your perspective, what this really means and why you say illness is random specifically.
Well, and I'm going to correct myself. I should have said illness can be random, and illness is often random. Certainly, if you drink too much and you end up with liver problems, or you smoke a lot and you end up with lung cancer, that's not a shock. But on the other hand, what I mean by random is there's a lot of people that smoke and don't get lung cancer, and there's a lot of people that get lung cancer who have, never smoked. It just depends. I'll tell you about my father-in-law, who lived a very healthy life until died at about 84 or 85. He ate nothing but red meat, smoked cigars for most of his life, never exercised, hated vegetables, wouldn't look at a carrot. And as I said, lived to be a healthy 84, 85, whatever he was. I, on the other hand, I exercise 3 or 4 times a week. I have a very disciplined diet. My blood pressure is higher than his ever was. So sometimes it's just the luck of the draw, it's genetics. You just can't say I did this, so therefore if I don't do this again, I won't be sick. And I think that we all want to find the reason that we're ill. It gives us a sense of control, but I think it's a false sense of control because we really can't control it. There's a lot. In answer to the stress issue, I think there's a lot of women who are stressed and who get sick. There's a lot of women who are stressed and don't get sick. There's a lot of women who aren't stressed and get sick anyway, or they're stressed less. I just don't know that you can say, well, it's because of this or because of that. If I'd only napped more, I wouldn't have gotten sick, that kind of thing. It's,
Well, to speak to that, the science behind it is actually quite clear too. So, if you've taken a genetic test from 23andMe and take some of their health screening
yeah,
questions,
yeah.
they'll actually reveal some of what your genes tell you about your health, right?
Mhm,
And
mhm.
so, I, for instance, found out that I'm of a particular genotype that, for some reason, is associated with less fear of heights. Well, I'm not afraid of heights at all.
Huh.
And so, yeah, I know, really interesting stuff. So even attached to behavioral things.
Yes,
They've
yes.
also
That's fascinating.
identified that if you have the ApoE4 genotype and more than one representation of it, you're going to be much more likely to develop cancers. And so early on, when geneticists were kind of unveiling all this really incredible research, they were really battling the ethics of sharing with people what their genotypes were,
Yeah,
how that the specific genome that you have impacts the likelihood of your health to remain constant. And also the fact that there could be an ethical quandary when it comes to insurance and medical insurance. This is a good deal of the part of the reason, rather, that many people choose not to get their genetic test done. They're fearful that eventually it could be used
yeah,
against them, right?
yeah. Yes, it is. It was just in the paper that whole article was on what people don't want their insurance companies or themselves to know.
Right. Well, because if you know it and then you share it with your
Right,
medical care provider, like, oh, well, I was just looking on 23andMe and it turns out I have a higher likelihood of developing Alzheimer's and early onset. So I want to talk to you about that. Does
right.
that now become part of your medical record? Is
Yes,
that going to somehow impact your healthcare long term? What happens if we suddenly go to a space where this is considered almost a pre-existing health condition because
right,
you are
right.
predisposed to have this certain trajectory with regard to your health.
Mhm, mhm.
It's a scary thing.
It's a
So,
very scary thing. And I
yeah.
think that's again one of the structural issues that prevents people from finding out as much as they can about themselves because it can be used against them. And that's a viable, conclusion.
Well, it's a possibility because you never know what's going to change with regard to the law, right?
Right,
So
right.
right now, what's true doesn't need to remain true in 10 years or 20 years. Laws
Let's
can
hope.
change.
Let's hope not.
And so we'll see. But ultimately, I think having all of those tools in your tool shed is a very good thing because if you learn that you're predisposed to something, you can take your health into your own hands. You can say,
Yes,
okay, well, I need to make these life choices that are going to support my health long term. I
right,
need to know that I'm going to have a higher likelihood of developing heart disease. So it's important that I get all my omega 3s and maybe I consider taking a
mhm,
CoQ10 supplement
mhm, mhm,
and consider dietary and lifestyle changes that will support heart health. I mean,
right,
these things might be best for us anyways, but
right.
sometimes you just need a catalyst or a little
That's
push or a little
true.
bit more knowledge.
That's true. That's a good point. And
Yeah.
don't leave out the brain gut, relationship, that so much of what we eat affects our moods and our health, of course. I mean, it's fascinating new research, just fascinating.
Yeah, well, one of my favorite quotes from an Italian researcher who studies fats. He said, and I'm forgetting his name, but he said, mind your liver. Because what they're finding as they do more and more research is that there's a direct connection between Alzheimer's and liver health. And
Huh.
so people
No.
who don't take good care of their livers, who overconsume alcohol, you
Mhm.
get, kind of a hardened liver, cirrhosis of the liver, and
Uh-huh.
then it's less capable of regenerating. And it's essentially the filter for your blood, right? And so it's not necessarily that they're finding a direct connection between the
Right.
two, but
Get
the
it.
correlation is so strong
Mhm.
that they know that liver health and brain health are tied, that there's some things that they're yet to fully comprehend about how they're tied. And so ensuring that you mind your liver will will be better for your long-term mental health.
We
Really.
should say mind your health, but as a subset, mind your liver,
Yeah,
right?
right. And put it in the reverse way. Mind your liver, mind your brain, mind your health.
Right. Exactly.
Now, before we get to our final set of questions, I want to make sure we have a chance to talk about the fact that women end up more strongly medicated than men, generally speaking. I
Yeah.
actually found this to be surprising. I thought that men would be more likely to have more medications than women because, in my mind, I think men are like, okay, quick fix, patch it. And that, like my husband in particular, he's an engineer. He's always trying to like solve everything, right? Whereas women in my life tend to want to discuss things or think them through a little bit more, not necessarily move right
Right.
to the solution necessarily.
Yeah.
So I was just curious what your perspective was on that. Like, where did you find the research? What does it say about our behavior?
Well, I don't actually, I'd have to look. I don't remember where I found the research, but we go to the doctor more than men. We take our kids, our elderly relatives, parents, whatever. And the more times you go to the doctor, the more medications you get. Plus,
Mm,
I think there's some legitimate reasons. We have more chronic diseases. And so we need more medication for relief. We have more anxiety and depression. So we need more medication for relief. I mean, et cetera. But I think what I found particularly interesting was that although we're prescribed more medication than men, we don't follow through. There's a real compliance problem with people. I mean, men and women don't necessarily do what their doctor suggests, but women are less likely to comply than men are because, again, we're
mm.
taking care of our family, we're afraid of side effects, which is what happened to me. You don't want to be knocked out of the water because of a common side effect. So that I think again that it was very surprising to me because we're such good stewards of our health and on the one hand, and yet on the other hand, we just don't comply with the treatment that we've been prescribed. And that's one of this, I guess it was Everett Koop, I think, that said something about medicines don't do any good in people that don't take them. And I think that that's something we all need to remember.
Well, I find myself wondering sometimes if we get overprescribed.
Yeah.
I want to solve this health problem for you. Here you go. Here's a pill.
Yes.
When that's not necessarily the patch that we necessarily need.
Well, and I think that another problem that is also a structural problem. New Zealand and the United States are the only two countries in the world that allow pharmaceutical companies to advertise their medications directly to consumers. And
Mhm.
it's very, very, very successful. I think it's something like 40% of people that see and men and women that see an ad for a medication on television will phone their doctor the next morning to ask about it or request it or whatever. And I mean, that's terrible. We're prescribing medications for ourselves without perhaps the necessary pharmaceutical or chemical background to know what we're asking for. I just think that this advertising is very, very, very serious. Medications that are advertised sell 9 times more than medications that aren't. So it's very tempting for the pharmaceutical companies to advertise a particular drug, and they spend millions, if not billions, doing it. Their advertising budgets increase annually.
Well, that's because they're making a ton of
Yes. Yes, they are. And I was going to say that, and I thought, whoops, you better not.
money. I mean, they have more money to spend because they're making more money, and
Right,
if they just keep
right,
ratcheting it up. So
right.
I think of a couple of specific ads that I've heard in the past couple of years, and I don't want to name a specific drug or a specific drug company because I'm sorry, a little scared of getting sued for something
Yes,
and saying it
yes,
wrong, right? Like because I'm
yeah,
going from memory here.
yeah,
But there was an ad that I saw where they were basically giving a drug for rheumatoid arthritis and saying in the end, side effects may include, and among the list of side effects that it could include were leukemia, which is
yeah,
cancer.
right,
And so, I mean, it's like, let's think some of these things through a little bit more. Some of the drugs that you may be prescribed can actually create more problems than they solve. And one of the biggest drugs out there, or one of the most commonly prescribed drugs, is a set of drugs to help you sleep.
right,
And the reality is, if you're not sleeping, there are typically other underlying reasons that you're not sleeping that can be addressed through diet and lifestyle as opposed to taking a pill. And the moment that we start to go over that edge and say, okay, well, I'm going to take this pill to sleep, the quality of sleep may not be good. It's a drugged sleep. You wake up groggy. You may
yep,
not feel as clear throughout your day because it's not the
yes,
same kind of quality sleep. And then now you're over caffeinating and suddenly now you're starting to feel anxious and now you get another pill for anxiety
right,
and this is impacting
exactly.
your mental health and now you need another pill for your mental health or depression. And so there's like a cascading set of events that
Mhm.
occur from the first drug being prescribed which you may not have needed in the first place if you'd made a few diet and lifestyle changes. And I'm not trying to preach here, but I just think these things are common sense. Like we know them in our bones in many cases.
Right,
And it's really tough for people, I think, to go against the doctor recommendation. Oh, well, you're having trouble sleeping. Let me make a prescription for Sonesta or whatever. And
whatever,
you say, oh, okay, well, I'll do that. You do that, you get a cascade of other effects from it that
yeah.
you could have eliminated by simply not taking that drug in the first place.
Well, and I think, well, two things. I want to go back to what you said about the side effects of leukemia, because that almost, I mean, sort of happened to me. I have an arthritic thumb, and I mean, it hurts. So I went to, but I didn't know it was arthritis. So I went to the doctor, and she said it's arthritis, and she gave me this medication. And fortunately, because of all my research, I looked it up. Well, I'm taking Lexapro for depression, and so one of the side effects of this particular drug with Lexapro is a brain bleed. Now, would you rather have a sore thumb or a brain bleed? I mean, it was an easy decision. But the other thing I wanted to say too is that Americans take approximately 4 prescriptions. Each American takes an average of about 4 prescriptions every day. That's a
Mm.
lot. And women are, all of these drug ads that are advertised towards consumer are mostly aimed towards women because we make so many of, I think we make like 80% of all healthcare purchasing decisions. So if you notice your drug ads, the protagonist is frequently a woman with a child because we're caretakers.
Yeah.
And they found that mothers or women respond to those ads even more. So, I mean, it's truly, the pharmaceuticals are a business and you really have to be careful what you do. And again, research what you take. I mean, imagine I could have had a brain bleed because I have my right thumb is arthritic. I mean, really?
Well, because your doctor doesn't necessarily understand all of the conflicting side effects. They're not a
Right.
pharmacist.
Exactly.
And
Exactly.
even a
Yeah.
pharmacist, unless they're looking at the two side by side, isn't going to know to tell you that when they do
Yeah.
what do they do? The consult when you're picking up your prescription for the first time. And they
Right.
say, okay, well, here's the list of side effects. This is how you take this drug. This is when. Don't have it with milk. If you experience X, Y, or Z, you should contact your
Right.
doctor. I mean, that's the basics, right?
Right. Right.
But they aren't going to know that you're on Lexapro or something else.
Right.
And so I just think it's so critical that people look at these things seriously, that
Yes.
they do investigate for themselves how drugs can interact. Because
Mhm.
if they don't do that and their doctor hasn't taken the extra care and their pharmacist didn't know, then the next thing you're going to be in some sort of a health collapse that could have been avoidable in the first place. And
Well,
of course, I mean, this isn't a health podcast, but like we need to be serious about advocating for our health. I think that's the
mhm.
entire point that we've been making this entire
Yes.
episode. That's the
Yes.
entire point you're making with
Yes.
Sidelined.
Yes.
Be an advocate for your own health
For sure.
and make sure that you're not kind of just taking these recommendations willy-nilly and not considering
Right.
your space in managing your own health.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well said. Well said. And I was thinking, I rarely stay for the pharmaceutical consultations. I just grab my drug and, and get out of there. So, which is wrong. I mean, I'm absolutely wrong. But I do read the inserts. I always do that. So I know what I'm getting into.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's when like for the example with the cream I had to put on my
Yeah.
face, I read the inserts and that's when I found out what it was being prescribed was a chemotherapeutic agent. And so I had an expectation. I'm like, okay, first day I probably won't notice. Second day I might not either. And that
Yeah.
was exactly as it was. Like by the third day, I felt like crap.
Yeah.
And that's the way these things are. And at least if you're walking in with eyes wide open, you understand
Right.
what to expect. You understand what the treatment is. You have an open conversation with your doctor. You share transparently what your experience is. And if there's something that comes up that shouldn't be there, then they can address it with you.
Right.
And so it's just, we need to be a little bit more transparent about ourselves with our doctors. I think that's one of the key points. We
Mm-hmm.
need to advocate for ourselves and put ourselves ahead of the line when it
Right.
comes to the kids
Right.
and such, because I think if we put ourselves at the front, we'll get it done.
Well, and I think it's important to remember that a lot of the drugs, for example, are tested on men. So women do have more side effects. We're smaller, we weigh less, but and not all of them, but a lot of them are tested on the male body. So when they're prescribed to women, the effects are different than perhaps the researchers anticipated.
Well, and it even varies by race and ethnicity too.
Yeah, very
So
much.
So yeah, I mean there are different ways that health concerns present in different cultures of the world. Like if you have
Absolutely.
Asian descent versus European, you might respond to that medication differently. One of
Right.
the things that we actually covered in an earlier episode of Care More Be Better with Godfrey Coker, he is an African American male and he works in that side of the world, working with genetics and
Yeah.
disease and things like that. And he stated plainly that African American people respond differently to a lot of the medications and are underrepresented
Yeah.
in the clinical trials. So, because they're underrepresented in the clinical trials,
Right.
the side effects that they see aren't necessarily cataloged the same way. And that means that the drugs don't work as well on that population. And so, these are systemic problems we need to work
Yes.
through. It's,
Absolutely.
hey, awareness is the first step, right?
Yep, absolutely. Awareness is critical. It's the if you're aware, you have some control to do something about it. You need to recognize and learn to deal with the hurdles that you're going to have to jump because of the systemic issues.
Right? Exactly. Start with being your own advocate.
You got it. You got
So I will recommend that everybody pick up this book. I know it's coming out in April.
it, April.
And so this episode will likely air right around the time that the book is published.
Oh, good. Thank
This
you.
will be produced as both a video on YouTube and possibly also offered on Facebook, but also as an audio file wherever people listen to podcasts.
Lovely.
So I wondered if you had any closing words or if there was a question I asked that I haven't already, you could ask and answer it.
I will. There was one question that I get every single time whenever I discuss my book, and that is, should I go to a male doctor or a female doctor?
I find that question surprising.
And I have to say, I actually didn't, because it seems so tempting to say, well, of course, female doctors, blah, 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 blah. But actually, I think the first thing you need to do when you go to a doctor is research, a new doctor, is research and find out, be sure they're competent. See where they did their training, see where they got their education, where did they do their residency or their internship, what's the quality of the hospital, et cetera. And the second thing I think you need to do is find somebody with whom you're comfortable. I don't think it's a gender issue. It's a competency issue and a comfort issue. And that can depend on you and the particular individuals involved. I have a male doctor that always asks how I'm doing, and I have a female doctor that never does. And usually they say, oh, we'll go to a female doctor, they'll talk to you more. Well, it depends on the doctor. And I think that that's very important.
Yeah. Well, I
Competency.
feel like I'm lucky with my doctor because even though I begrudgingly went from a PPO to an HMO,
Yeah.
it was a savings, such a significant savings that I just
Yeah,
had
of
to.
course.
But she is one of the most thoughtful doctors I've ever had. She
Fantastic.
really listens and doesn't make me feel rushed with the kids or with her.
Right.
And so my husband sees the same doctor, my kids are seeing the same doctor,
That's wonderful.
and I just think that's great. So if you find that, then hold on to it until you have to let go.
Mhm.
The previous doctor I had to let go of because Facebook made her an offer she couldn't refuse, and
Okay.
I couldn't believe it. They have doctors on campus there because they want to keep you there, like,
Yeah, I didn't know that either, actually. That's interesting. I don't blame them.
yeah, just having to go from working, 5 days a week in a private practice to only working 3 and getting more money. I mean,
Let's see, right? That's like sore thumb, brain bleed, right?
right, exactly. So, at any rate, I've really enjoyed this
I
conversation.
think I did too.
It's a topic I'm passionate about, obviously, and everybody needs to care about their health, but there is a tremendous social impact to women putting their health second.
For sure.
And you know what? This is one thing we all need to be selfish about. And so pick up a copy of Sidelined.
Thank you.
And I can also just say that you can find out more about Susan Salenger at susansalenger.com.
Right. It's Salenger.
That's great. So I will include links to that in show
Thank you.
notes. Thank you so much for joining me today, Susan. This has been awesome.
Thank you for having me.
As always, I'll be sure to include links to the items we discussed today in show notes, which includes a direct link to Sidelined the book, as well as to susansalenger.com, spelled SALENGER.com. I hope you'll share this podcast with members of your community, your family, and friends. You could forward the link to this specific episode, or even just grab their phone. Go ahead and subscribe to the show for them and download this specific episode. I know that's what I have to do when I'm with my parents and I want them to hear something because they're a little less tech savvy than some. Now, if you haven't already, I hope you'll write us a review. We want to hear from you, and this will also help us climb the charts and reach more people. You can even leave us a voicemail directly on our website, caremorebebetter.com. Lean into discovery, stay curious, ask questions, and get involved. Thank you, listeners, now and always, for being a part of this pod and this community, because together we really can do so much more. We can care more and we can be better. We can even regenerate Earth. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Care More, Be Better, a podcast for social good. To make sure you never miss an episode, subscribe, rate, and review wherever you listen to podcasts, and share with your friends to help us reach more people and spread more social good.